If you're not ready for everything, you're not ready for anything. Paul Auster.
Despite their physical differences, like being shorter and having longer skulls, we might have more in common with Neanderthals than we'd like to admit. First of all, their brains were bigger, which doesn't make them smarter than us, but they could communicate with one another. They settled in family communities and took care of the sick and the elderly. They also crafted sophisticated tools which would have been used for anything from hunting to possibly shipbuilding. They even cooked their vegetables and ate them, which is more than you can say. So, if Neanderthals are simply the beta version of what humans became, could they still live among us? Neanderthals, in fact, did live among us. For about 5,000 years, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted in Europe, and likely interbred. This would explain why most Eurasians probably have at least 1% of the Neanderthal DNA in their genome, while anyone of African descent doesn't have any Neanderthal DNA since their ancestors didn't migrate through Eurasia. But with the Homo sapien population significantly outnumbering the Neanderthal population, it's likely that modern humans simply absorbed the Neanderthal species. Another theory is that we outcompeted them for resources during the last ice age, resulting in their extinction. But whichever theory is right, what if the concluding fact was wrong? What if Neanderthals were not extinct? If Neanderthals somehow evolved as a separate but very similar species to humans, how would they fare? Despite their communication and craftsmanship abilities, the laws of natural selection prove that Homo sapiens are superior, which means the survival options for Neanderthals wouldn't be that great. Barring the likelihood of early modern humans breeding them out of existence, maybe they'd want nothing to do with us. Realizing how our differences outweigh our similarities, could we expect Neanderthals to establish their own communities and continue to exist independently of the developing world? It's hard to predict exactly how a species that went extinct about 40,000 years ago would behave today. But then again, maybe we just have to look around us. Neanderthals may be extinct, but we did evolve alongside them, and some of us inherited more than others. So think twice before you call someone a Neanderthal. It can be quite offensive.
Between 1768 and 1771, three printmakers known as the Society of Gentlemen for Edinburgh, Scotland, developed volumes of information that would come to be known as Encyclopedia Britannica, or the Dictionary of Arts and Sciences. The popularity of the brand grew so much that in 1920, retail giant Sears and Roebuck purchased the Encyclopedia Britannica company and relocated its corporate headquarters from Edinburgh, Scotland, to Chicago. By 1940, Sears and Roebuck decided to give the brand to the University of Chicago, but the university didn't want to be in the business of managing a product or have the responsibilities that came with it. William Benton, a vice president at the university, put up his own money to take control of the asset. Upon his death, he willed Encyclopedia Britannica to his charitable foundation to support the University of Chicago. By 1990, the sales of Encyclopedia Britannica, a modern-day monopoly, would have reached sales of $650 million. In today's standards, that would be approximately $1.5 billion. Little did Encyclopedia Britannica realize that in the 70s, an inventor by the name of James Russell was experimenting with the technology that would store data digitally. By 1980, Philips and Sony would develop a device to read this technology, the disc player, and licensed the CD-ROM. When Encyclopedia Britannica was approached by Microsoft in 1985 to partner with them to launch their data on CD, Encyclopedia Britannica declined. By 1993, Microsoft would release its own encyclopedia on CD-ROM called Encarta. By 1995, the Benton Foundation would try to sell Encyclopedia Britannica, even approaching Microsoft, but they declined. By 1996, the encyclopedia would declare bankruptcy and be sold for less than half its value. Postcards were introduced during the Victorian era, and because of their novelty, they caught on very quickly. The earliest documented postcard was said to have been created by Theodore Hook. The card was hand-painted, depicting several postal workers sitting around an inkwell. The card was thought to be a practical joke, mocking the mail services of that day. In 2002, that postcard sold for a record $34,000. By 1951, there were approximately 4.5 billion postcards being delivered in the U.S. By 1980, that number had dropped to 1.8 billion, but then rallied in 1990 to 3.3 billion. By 2010, that number was again down to 1.4 billion, and the present day, 5 million postcards are delivered and continue to decline. The decline has also affected other industries, gift shops, the travel and tourism industry, and stamps. Yes, stamps, whose sales have decreased by the millions over the last decade. Postcards also had a dark history. In the 1880s, lynchings were used to intimidate emancipated African Americans, civil rights workers of all ethnicities, and voters. African American men, women, and children accused of crimes would be subjected to vicious mobs who would hold public lynchings. These terrorist acts were captured on photographs and made into postcards. The postcards were sold and often used as souvenirs, and there were actually collectors of these cards, and they were openly distributed for over 50 years. Here is one such postcard depicting the lynching of Virgil, Robert and Thomas Jones, and Joseph Riley in 1908. While the U.S. Postal Service banned lynching postcards in 1908, those who wished to continue sending the cards simply disguised them in envelopes and mail wrappers. There are simply just some things that are destined for extinction.
I just signed into law the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, making lynching a federal hate crime for the first time in American history. Hundreds of similar bills have failed to pass. Over the years, several federal hate crime laws were enacted, including one I signed last year to combat COVID-19 hate crimes. But no federal law expressly prohibited lynching, none, until today. Between 1877 and 1950, more than 4,400 black people were murdered by lynching, most in the South, but some in the North as well. That's a lot of folks, man, and a lot of silence for a long time. Lynching was pure terror to enforce the lie that not everyone belongs in America, not everyone is created equal. Terror to systematically undermine hard-fought civil rights. Terror, not just in the dark of the night, but in broad daylight. Innocent men, women, and children hung by nooses from trees, bodies burned and drowned and castrated. Their crimes? Trying to vote, trying to go to school, trying to own a business or preach the gospel. False accusations of murder, arson, and robbery. Simply being black. Emmett Till was an only child. He grew up in the south side of Chicago with his mother Mamie and grandparents and cousins. In the summer of 1955, Emmett turned 14 years old, ready to start 8th grade in the fall. Before school started, he wanted to visit his cousins in Mississippi. So Emmett's mom dropped him off at the train station in Chicago. Her own family fled the Delta decades earlier. So she told him the unwritten rules she had to follow. Quote, be very careful how you speak. Say yes, sir, and no, ma'am. And do not hesitate to humble yourself if you have to get down on your knees. End of quote. That same speech, that same admonition, too many black parents today still have to use that admonition. They have to tell their children when it comes to encounters with the law enforcement, and so many other circumstances. She kissed Emmett goodbye. It was the last time she saw her son alive. Days after he arrived in Mississippi, Emmett's mutilated body was found in a river. His mother demanded that her son be sent home so that his funeral in Chicago could be an open casket. Here's what she said, let the people see what I've seen. America and the world saw what she saw. Although he was one of thousands who were lynched, his mother's courage to show the world what was done to him energized the civil rights movement. But the law is not just about the past. It's about the present and our future as well. From the bullets in the back of Ahmaud Arbery to countless other acts of violence, countless victims known and unknown, the same racial hatred that drove the mob to hang a noose brought that mob carrying torches out of the fields of Charlottesville just a few years ago. Racial hate isn't an old problem. It's a persistent problem. And I know many of the civil rights leaders here know, you heard me say it 100 times. Hate never goes away. It only hides. It hides under the rocks. Given just a little bit of oxygen, it comes roaring back out, screaming. But what stops it is all of us, not a few. All of us have to stop it.
According to a report by Mintel Market Research, napkins are losing relevance. Just close your eyes for a moment and visualize the last time you walked down a grocery store aisle. Did it look something like this? Just 20 years ago, you could find napkins in just about 60% of American households, and today that number has declined to 41%. Why? Millennials. While 61% of people aged 65 and older report using paper napkins every day, just 37% of 25 to 34-year-olds answered the same way. In 2017, global use of paper towels for in-home use hit about $12 billion in sales, and the United States made up about $5.7 billion of that number. So in essence, the U.S. uses as many paper towels as the global economy combined. And why this obsession? Well, because millennials do not like using napkins. Well, we have another shocker. Doorbells are becoming a thing of the past because most people typically just text and say, I'm here. That's evidenced by a question that was posted on Twitter in June of 2019 asking if anyone used doorbells anymore. Tens of thousands of people replied and apparently said, nope. Never in a million years did I think bar soap would decline. But now, because the majority of millennials think it's unsanitary, that's exactly what's happening. And if you don't believe me, ask the 125-year-old brand Ivory Soap. So is this belief even true? Well, according to recent research, 31% of consumers aged 65 and over believe that bar soap is unsanitary, while a whopping 60% of millennials think it is. And while this has certainly been disproven, it has still taken soap a while to rebound. So what do millennials prefer? Hand soap and body wash.
The oldest surviving recipes for soap come from Babylonia, written into clay tablets and jars as far back as 2800 BC. These recipes are like most basic soap recipes to the present day, consisting of water, an alkaline salt, in this case wood ash, and a fatty acid, in this case cassia oil. It's unknown if the soap was meant for washing oneself, dishes, or clothes, but the soap would have been good for any of the three, though it wouldn't have smelled nice, which is a common thing of many basic soaps. They don't smell very nice. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to the end of the Second Intermediate Period of Egypt, 1550 BC, records a soap recipe for washing one's self, much like the Babylonian soap recipe, but it uses animal fats and olive oil. The Ebers Papyrus contains other medical recipes, from diabetes medicine to birth control. Other Egyptian papyri have been found with similar soap recipes for washing clothes. To make these soaps, one would boil the selected oil or fat in a cauldron, slowly stirring in a mixture of alkaline salts or wood or vegetable ash until it thickened. Once thickened, it would be poured into a mold, let to cool and set for a few weeks, then cut into bars. And this method is still used to this day in the Levant. Though these are the oldest surviving recipes, soap most likely predates them. People likely washed their dishes and self with wood ashes for thousands of years before. The oils of one's hands or of food would mix into the ash and make a soap to clean with. But not all peoples used hard soap for washing. At least as far back as the 5th century BC, Greeks washed themselves by rubbing themselves with olive oil and scraping it off with a blunt blade called a strigil. While one rubbed themselves with the oils that might be perfumed, they often would rest in a steaming bath so that their sweat would also aid in cleaning. This method was carried on by the Romans. If wood ash was mixed into the oil, which it might have been, many people think it may have been, then it would have been a primitive liquid soap. The Romans also used hard soap, which they got from both the Levant and the Germanic and Celtic barbarians. Pliny the Elder, in his work Natural History, recommended such hard soaps for the washing of hair and wrote of the Germanic tribes using them. The use of hard soap grew in Rome, with soap production occurring in Pompeii and across the empire. Hard soap continued to grow in popularity even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, with the Soapmakers Guild being very prominent in Naples in the 6th century and on. Spain was well known for its soaps. Their soaps would grow in popularity with the introduction of new soap-making methods, but most soap was made at home. It was one of the many tasks the average woman would do throughout the week. During the 10th century in Syria, new recipes and methods arose that created pleasant-smelling soaps. Recipes like those recorded by Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Zairi are the root of modern hard toilet soap. These pleasant-smelling soaps were popular across both the Islamic world and Europe. Soap makers in Spain attained these recipes, and competition arose between the soap makers of Spain and the Levant. But the homemade soap would not be replaced until the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution.
This is the Earth, as it looked 90 million years ago. Geologists call this period the Late Cretaceous. It was a time of extreme global warming, when dinosaurs still ruled the planet. They went about their lives secure in their place at the top of the food chain, oblivious to the changes taking place around them. The continents were drifting apart, opening huge rifts in the Earth's crust. They flooded, becoming seas. Algae thrived in the extreme heat, poisoning the water. They died and fell in their trillions to the bottom of the rifts. Rivers washed sediment into the seas, until the organic remains of the algae were buried. As the pressure grew, so did the heat, until a chemical reaction transformed the organics into hydrocarbon fossil fuels, oil, and natural gas. A similar process occurred on land, which produced coal. It took nature about 5 million years to create the fossil fuels that the world consumes in 1 year. World population has grown to 7 billion and is expected to exceed 9 billion by 2050. On a flat, infinite Earth, this might not be a problem. However, as the Earth is round and finite, we will eventually face limits to growth. Economic expansion has resulted in increases in atmospheric nitrous oxide and methane, ozone depletion, increases in great floods, damage to ocean ecosystems, including nitrogen runoff, loss of rainforest and woodland, increases in domesticated land, and species extinctions. If we place a single grain of rice on the first square of a chessboard, double this and place 2 grains on the second, double again and place 4 on the third, double again and place 8 on the fourth, and continue this way, putting on each square twice the number of grains than were on the previous one. By the time we reach the final square, we need an astronomical number of grains. 9 quintillion, 223 quadrillion, 372 trillion, 36 billion, 854,776,000 grains. More grain than the human race has grown in the last 10,000 years. Modern economies, like the grains on the chessboard, double every few decades. On which square of the chessboard are we? Besides energy, civilization demands numerous essential resources: fresh water, topsoil, food, forests, and many kinds of minerals and metals. Growth is limited by the essential resource in scarcest supply. A barrel is made of staves, and like water filling a barrel, growth can go no further than the lowest stave, or the most limited essential resource. Humans currently utilize 40% of all photosynthesis on Earth. Though it might be possible to use 80%, we are unlikely to ever use 160%. The global food supply relies heavily on fossil fuels. Before World War I, all agriculture was organic. Following the invention of fossil fuel-derived fertilizers and pesticides, there were massive improvements in food production, allowing for increases in human population. The use of artificial fertilizers has fed far more people than would have been possible with organic agriculture alone. Fossil fuels are needed for farming equipment, transportation, refrigeration, packaging in plastic, and cooking. Modern agriculture uses land to turn fossil fuels into food and food into people. About 7 calories of fossil fuel energy are used to produce 1 calorie of food. In America, food travels approximately 1,500 miles from farm to customer. Besides fossil fuel decline, there are several threats to the current system of food production: cheap energy, improved technology, and subsidies have allowed massive fish catches. Global fish catches peaked in the late 1980s, forcing fishermen to move into deep waters. Nitrogen runoff by fossil fuel-based fertilizers poisons rivers and seas, creating enormous dead zones. At this rate, all fish populations are projected to collapse by 2048. Acid rain from cities and industries leaches the soil of vital nutrients such as potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Another threat is a lack of water. Many farms use water pumped from underground aquifers for irrigation. The aquifers need thousands of years to fill up, but can be pumped dry in a few decades, like oil wells. America's massive Ogallala aquifer has fallen so low that many farmers have had to return to less productive dry land farming. Additionally, the use of irrigation and fertilizers can lead to salinization, the accumulation of salt in the soil. This is a major cause of desertification. Still another threat is topsoil loss. 200 years ago, there were 6 feet of topsoil on the American prairies. Today, through tillage and poor practices, approximately half is gone. Irrigation encourages the growth of stem rust fungi like UG99, which has the potential to destroy 80% of the world's grain harvest. According to Norman Borlaug, father of the Green Revolution, stem rust has immense potential for social and human destruction. The use of biofuels means that less land will be available for food production. An area has a finite carrying capacity. This is the number of animals or people that can live there indefinitely. If a species overshoots the carrying capacity of that area, it will die back until the population returns to its natural limits. The world has avoided this die-off by finding new lands to cultivate or by increasing production, which has been possible largely thanks to oil. To continue growth, more resources are required than the Earth can provide, but no new planets are available. In the face of all these challenges, global food production must double by 2050 to feed the growing world population. 1 billion people are already malnourished or starving. There will be challenges in feeding over 9 billion in the years to come, when world oil and natural gas production will be in decline.